We're going to continue on our series, which is They Lived It, talking about people who have been in the Bible as heroes to many of us, but we lose sight of the fact sometimes that they are and were very real people. I say are because we're going to have the opportunity to get to know them without name tags. We're gonna have to actually be a little extroverted and greet people and really intend to know them. So we're going to be in Genesis 6. The days of Noah, such a famous person, the subject of many versions of the Bible story of the Ark. I want to focus on his character, his life, his family a little bit today. I think that even though everyone in the room is probably familiar with the story, as I've always encouraged you to do, expect the Spirit of the Lord to say something perhaps different, new, or refreshing, something you hadn't seen before. It is going to involve a little bit of technicality. Sometimes we will have to resort to teaching you things you need to know and remember about what we would call the apologetic of the Scripture, because in all of the fantasy and imagination of the story, we really are dealing with facts. And so I'll be reminding you of that while I pretty much cover Noah in 1 week. So the first verse, now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. Now during these days you had the rapid population expansion going on across the planet. Be fruitful and multiply. Remember that? That was one of the orders that God gave. And there were also added to that especially long lifespans because of the pre-flood era of the world. And that is something that is an interesting study, if you're more than a casual student of the Bible, to get into some of the theories about that, because Genesis teaches that God made the waters above the firmament and the waters below the firmament meaning the atmosphere. And so if you read carefully, you'll see that the earth may have had, and this is a theory I believe in, may have had a dome of water, which is where all of that flood water came from. It would also explain blocking out the rays of the sun, which cause aging. It would also be the reason why it had never rained on the earth before this particular time. There are a lot of things that the canopy theory, as is called, answers. It is worth a friendly debate, but it answers a lot of different questions. But when you have people living hundreds of years, they can have lots of kids. And you think you got a problem with lots of teenagers now that you've raised or are about to at some point. But there were some specific problems in this, and it leaves a lot of unanswered questions because God is dealing with the problem of some unnatural issues with the offspring of these unions. And the text gives us some hints. It's explained a little further in Jude, but it begins with the sons of God saw the daughters of men. It's more accurate. I'm going to kind of rumble through this a little bit, hoping that you'll, if you're interested, will pick up the theme and study it on your own. But the sons of God turn out to be bad guys. Now remember that anything and anyone God created was created good. The angels were good. Eventually, a third of them would become bad. So even though we're talking about a bad situation with bad angels, they were still created by God. So don't be confused with the term the sons of God. They're all the sons of God. We're all the sons and daughters of God, good, bad, and indifferent. Even the evil ones who become more evil by the day are still born in the image of God. So you have to keep the big picture here. But it's more accurate to see these characters as either demons. Now remember, there are angels, a third of them, that were in rebellion to God, which became, guess what, on the earth? Demons. The difficulty we have here is that the fall from grace by a third of the angels happened pre-creation. In other words, you weren't there. Right? You have to remember you weren't there. So any debate we have on this is speculative, but it's still interesting. I used to spend hours and hours up in the dorms in Bible college. I didn't live in the dorms, but I go there just to argue. Because it was fun. It was entertaining. The phrase sons of God refers to angelic creatures, and it's actually used 3 other times in the Old Testament. In Job 1 and 2, and then in 38, concerning the battle that Job was having with Satan, spiritual warfare, and trusting God in his life. A very interesting character that we will get to in this series. The translators clearly thought it referred to angelic beings, and not the other side of the argument is descendants of Seth, or the descendants of Cain, and the murderous nature of that family. And that is another theory to be looked at. But Jude 6 talks about, quote, angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own habitation. Now we know that in Hebrews it talks about entertaining angels unaware. We don't know the ability that they had at that time prior to judgment, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, you got to follow along with all this stuff, because it'll help you keep from being confused. If not, this sounds like Lord of the Rings. But there is good and evil in the world, and it has been expressed in past times through actual beings, Satan being the lead, the head of all that. So you have the angels who did not keep their proper domain. You have Satan himself able to appear as a what? Snake in the garden. So how far that went, and the abilities of angels to leave their own habitation, their own proper domain, we don't know. We know that it's limited now, because we're going to see in a moment that these guys get thrown in the pit. You know, they've been there longer than anybody because of their actions. Jude goes on to say that they sinned, quote, in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh. Jude goes on to make it clear that God, quote, reserved them in everlasting chains under darkness from the judgment of the great day. So after this particular time, they came under judgment prior to Noah, and then you have this new start. But it sets up an understanding of where Noah lived, and how he lived, and what level of evil he was facing. And by the time we get done, you will stop complaining. This guy really lived it when it came to corruption and evil society. Now, it's a little bit useless to speculate too much on these issues because of the mystery, as I mentioned a moment ago, the mystery of Satan's fall and his rebellion. And that is another study of Scripture, all that happened in the pre-creation era of earth. But, as I said, it makes for entertaining debate amongst serious Bible students. A commentator by the name of Boyce said this: the Savior could not be born of a demon-possessed mother. Duh. So if Satan could succeed in infecting the entire race, the deliverer could not come. So you had warfare at an incredible level, which tells you that Satan's been fighting Jesus for a really long time. Jesus is a huge threat. So why not Satan pollute the DNA of the entire earth if he possibly could? And so then the Lord said, and you'll understand why, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Now God could not allow the human race to stay in this genetically corrupt condition. It was bigger than just a whole lot of bad people. You know, they're bad people. They went to casinos and took drugs. You're talking about a level of corruption, possibly, that meant a real point of no return for God. My spirit shall not strive with man forever. He will not woo us forever. It's a point to be taken today. There's a point at which he says no more. Now the 120 years refers to the 120 years, I believe, that Noah spent preaching to these people. The ark didn't happen overnight. It didn't. Noah preached for 120 years faithfully with no apparent converts except his family. Now that's faithfulness in a corrupt generation. And evidently as a result of this genetic corruption, there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward. When the sons of man came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those were mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Some try to make out or paint a picture of this group being somehow noble. But if they were that noble, why were they about to die in the judgment of the flood? Another argument, settling point, at least as far as I'm concerned. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Does that have a little meaning to you? The amount, the degree, the level of wickedness on the earth, and that every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil. Read that again. That every intent, I looked it up. It means every. Intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil. Continually. That's real bad. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty certain there's bad people in the room. I know some of you. Most of you, really. But I don't think the worst person I've ever met fits this description. Every single intent of the thought of the heart, only evil continually. That I don't think that can be assigned to anybody I know. Maybe Uncle Fred that shows up drunk on Thanksgiving every single year. Sells used car on the side, never mind. I mean, you can maybe, but that is just, you're talking about a real problem. This was not just a general issue, you know, people making mistakes and God doesn't like it. Bad. A bad environment, a bad culture, a bad society. The wickedness of man was great in the earth, not just in town, not just downtown, not just a certain strip on the boulevard, the entire earth. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Now this shows us something important, I think. So the Lord said, I will destroy man who I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air. Why? Because they were under his authority. Both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. You know, Jesus said, as in the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Everybody remember that one? Now, if this was just a story, why is it mentioned so much in the New Testament and by Jesus himself? So it's real easy to dismiss things that seem to be like a fairy tale. But when Jesus compares his second coming and the days that we are living in, because I believe he's coming. When, I don't know. Now, I've met a lot of people that think they know. And I never have understood what part of no man knows the hour that they don't understand. That doesn't stop my expectation. But Jesus refers to it himself, that's the way it's going to be when Jesus comes back. Now, a lot of people look at the evil of the world, but let's measure it against Noah's evil. Every intent of the thought of the heart, evil continually. Now, do you think it's moving that direction? Yes, it is. Where people wake up in the morning and all they think about is greed and murder, selfishness, how to walk up somebody else's back and take advantage of it, to gain power. And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. But how bad? This bad. So my question is, what do you think about that today? How are you measuring it? Because Jesus certainly compared the greatest event in all of world history, of all existence, the second coming of Christ. He compares it to a guy with a name who lived at a time and a place. Noah. That's pretty heavy, isn't it? That puts Noah in a different category. The Lord was sorry he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. God's sorrow at man and the grief in his heart are interesting to me. It's kind of amazing. It doesn't mean that creation was out of control. It doesn't mean that God had hoped for something better and was unable to achieve it. It wasn't that he made a mistake. God knew all along how things would turn out because he's got man and his free will able to make a choice between sin and obedience. He's got angels with the free will to decide to follow their creator or follow Satan. Now that's always a great case for free will. For people to say, no, you don't have free will. Every thought is controlled by God. I understand the sovereignty of God, but I do not think he infringes on free will. Why else would he be sorrowful or grieving if he'd have been in charge of their choice? He has an emotional reaction because they have a choice and they made a bad one. The angels had a free choice and they made a bad choice. But the text says loud and clear above everything else that God sees his plan for the ages unfold and it affects him. He's not unfeeling in the face of human sin and rebellion. It in part answers the question of why do bad things happen to good people? Because there are bad things. And there are evil people. And there are people that make decisions that are evil. And the world is corrupt. And the weather is corrupt. This is not Eden anymore. There is no canopy to keep us from aging and make sure we have a garden-like atmosphere around the entire planet. You do realize that if there was such a thing, the whole earth would be a garden. There'd be no deserts. But I'd have to have the meteorologist come and talk to you about that. But all the different things that would not have been in place, from weather patterns to sinful people to a sinful earth and a groaning planet, would not be the case. And it affects God, and he feels it, and he grieves. And it's sorrowful to him. So when you're sorry for sin, you're matching up to his heart. I love how this particular section opened up from verse 8. Now Noah found grace in the eyes of God. You know, when Noah found grace, he didn't earn it. He found it just like you and I do. You don't earn it, you find it. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. Reminds you of Enoch? Another one. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This description of Noah is unique to him, not only referring to his righteous life, but the fact that he was uncorrupted by Satan's plan to sow this virus in the genetic pool. He had to find a pure man with a pure family and regular sons who weren't demon-possessed. That would be important, don't you think? We could translate easily perfect in his generation as Noah was pure in his generational or genetic profile. And that fits with that theory that I've been proposing. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. The DNA pollution theory would make sense here. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And here comes the orders. This was the life-changing factor in all of the story that makes it interesting and fascinating. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, covered inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, 50 cubits wide, with its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above. Set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. Now, this is a little different than the average obedience required from human beings. This represents specific orders. You get it? Like numbers and measurements and so on. That evidently existed at the time for Noah to understand, and it was fairly directed. One of the problems that I think we have today as believers is we don't take the Bible seriously. The Bible says something specific to obey. It's kind of a suggestion rather than an order. See, the ark wouldn't have worked if he hadn't done it the way God planned for it to be done. And our lives don't work unless we follow at least the basics of the manual. When it comes to morality, when it comes to sexual purity, when it comes to how to treat your neighbor or others, there are some basic factors that if we obey them, life works, and if we don't, life doesn't work so well. And so at this particular point, make yourself an ark. You have this interesting collaboration. I'm telling you to make it, but you make it for yourself, and if you make it the way I tell you to make it, you're going to like it. So you have to understand, Noah would like the ark, especially when the waters were raging. He would be thinking, I'm really glad I obeyed. And there are times in life where you think, well, I'm really glad I obeyed. Or times in life where you say, I'm really sorry I didn't obey. Gee, if I'd done it exactly the way the measurements said, I'd be in high cotton. I'd be floating above the waves. I mean, this is an interesting exercise about the character of Noah. He gets this ridiculous order. This is how you shall make it. Make it as long as a 30-story building. Make it 75 feet wide, 45 foot tall, and make it like a chest or like a giant shoebox. Forget the idea of a ship that's sailing. I want you to make a big barge. No sails, no masts, no stern, no bow. Just make a big barge. Now, it wasn't until 1858 that a boat bigger than the Ark was ever built in the world, 1858. Now, the Ark would hold about 35,000 pairs of species of animals of that size. Because this is always people's imagination without facts or science. They think, well, that wouldn't hold that many animals, really. Now, the average size of a land animal, this is average. You take the big ones and the small ones, the rabbits and the elephants, you make an average. And the average size land animal is about the size of a sheep. Now, the Ark would carry 135,560 in half of the Ark, if it were just average size. And that would leave plenty of room for people, food, and provisions. So I'm not going to go any further into those details, but just understand the Ark was built to do the job God said it would do. God's not a dummy, neither was Noah. You know, he had a rule, he had hammers, he had, you know. Now, one of the great things about this is since it had not rained on the earth yet, Noah had no idea what any of this meant. They understand, it's like, what? Build what? Now this is where you get to what I call collisions of faith. When God commands you through His Word or some other form of clarification in your life that you know is God speaking to you, whether prophetic or teaching or otherwise, or pastoral counsel or whatever, sometimes your faith is going to run into something you think is impossible to do that makes no sense. That's where faith collides with God's reality, a collision of faith. And that's what this was for Noah and his character. It hadn't rained yet. What do we need a boat for? Especially one as ugly as this. But you don't see that kind of thing. You don't see that kind of arguing. He might have questioned it. Hey, God, excuse me, what's rain? I don't know if God gave him an answer as to what's rain. Whatever you say. I like to think of Peter, you know, when Jesus asked him to walk on water. Come on. You want me to do what? A collision of faith. You want me to trust you with something that makes no sense at all? And Peter would have been right to say, I'm not a fish. I act like one sometimes. I think like one sometimes. But I know that I can't do that without your help, without your reasoning, without your confirmation. But it is part and parcel of being a believer. Get used to it. And God exercised it early with a man named Noah who had to live this particular trial of faith. A collision that ran right into something he didn't understand, didn't know, and didn't need to, because all he needed to do was obey. Well, isn't that blind faith? Yeah, get used to it. Well, I don't like blind faith. Be a Buddhist. A lot of other religions that don't require faith. This one does. This one does. Now, briefly, you have to understand there's a rich historical flow of information about the Ark. In 275 BC, a guy named Berosus, a Babylonian historian, this is 275 before Christ, wrote, but of this ship that grounded in Armenia, some part still remains in the mountain, and some get pitch from the ship by scraping it off. around AD 75, that's Josephus, the one who wrote about the siege on Jerusalem. He lived during Jesus' time, said that the locals collected relics from the ark all the time and showed them off during his lifetime. He also said that all the ancient historians that he knew personally wrote about the ark. In AD 180, Theophilus of Antioch wrote, quote, "The remains are to this day to be seen." I always thought that's so casual for old Theophilus. It's like a vacation stop, like stopping to see the giant tomato on Route 66 or something. Yeah, the remains are this day to be seen. Just turn left in Highway 34 and an elderly Arminian man in America said that as a boy, he visited the Ark with his father and 3 atheistic scientists in 1856. Their goal was to disprove the Ark's existence, but they found it and became so enraged that they tried to destroy it, but could not because it was too big and parts of it were petrified. In 1918, one of the scientists, an Englishman, admitted on his deathbed that the whole story was true. 1876, a distinguished British statesman and author, Viscount James Bryce, climbed Mount Ararat and reported finding a 4-foot-long piece of hand-tooled timber at an altitude of more than 13,000 feet. 6 Turkish soldiers, boy, say that, glad to practice that. 6 Turkish soldiers claimed to see the Ark in 1916. And in the early part of this last century, a Russian aviator named Vladimir Rakovsky claimed to discover the Ark again. He was stationed in southern Russia near the Turkish border in Mount Ararat. As he tested a plane, he and his co-pilot flew over the mountain and discovered on the edge of a glacier what he described as a boat the size of a battleship. He said it was partially submerged in a lake, and he could see there was an opening for a door nearly 20 feet square, but the door was missing. Rokovitsky told his commanding officer, and an expedition was dispatched to find the Ark and photograph it. The report and photographs were forwarded to the Tsar, who was soon overthrown, and the photos and report perished. Now, there have been a lot more attempts recently. I was most interested in the expeditions of Colonel James Irwin, the astronaut who piloted Apollo 15. That was of great interest in our church at the time because Colonel Irwin attended the church from time to time. His daughter and son-in-law went to church here all the time. I played softball with his son-in-law endless numbers of times, and we talked about the Ark a lot. And John went on one of the expeditions, and there are lots of reports and studies about their findings and what they didn't find. But it was always interesting to have Colonel Irwin in the church. You know, this is a sideline that I debated whether to put in this message, but you know, from time to time we've had really interesting people in our church. Really interesting people. And I remember when Colonel Irwin would sit in church again and again. And I'd always, you know, be glad to see him because I always like to have a little chat about what the latest thing going on with the Ark. And realize that this is a man who piloted the module above the moon, went to the moon and back. But my favorite thing to do was when I would be preaching and everything, I'd see Colonel Irwin there, and the people next to him and around him, and I always think, I wonder if they know they're sitting next to a guy who's been to the moon. And then there were others, like Philip Bailey. You know, I would sit normally in the front row, and I always wondered, I wonder if the people next and behind Philip know that they're sitting next to the lead singer of one of the greatest soul funk bands of all time, Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I always would wonder as the other people that, well, interesting people, football players and professionals and scientists and meteorologists and stuff like that. And I thought about that this week because I thought, you know, we're all crunched together now. And you have no idea who you're sitting next to. And you might want to find out. Because I ain't telling you. So just take that for what it's worth. I think we have some fascinating people, whether they're famous or not, in our church, and you might just want to find out who you're sitting next to. Okay, back. 2 Peter 3:1-7, Peter relates to the future judgment to the flood. There's so many references back to this. And he says unbelievers willfully forget the world that then existed, perished, being flooded with water. And God goes on back in Genesis to say, and behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. And it goes on. He promises the covenant. I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives with you. I find it incredible that out of no converts in 120 years, he got his kids on the ark. Preach it, brother. Okay, I will. For some of you, your greatest challenge in the world is get your own kids on the ark. God bless you. And pray. Because if he did one thing that counts, everybody else is going to perish. Everybody else is going to reject Noah's message. But he got his wife and kids on the ark. Now, I don't know if Noah would have any advice for us today, but you can somehow imagine him involving them in the work, the faithfulness, the labor of putting this fantastic work together. But how it happened, what the stories are, and there are some indications as you move on through the story about his relationship with his sons and so on. But I find it just an amazing thing that he got his wife and kids on the ark. So kind of take that however you want to, along with all of the other animals. And then in verse 22, thus, I love it, thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. When given this staggering job to do, Noah did it. He lived it. He actually did it. And I think that that's the task that we have to live in this world, which is becoming more and more like the days of Noah. Now he didn't complain about it. He didn't rebel. He just simply obeyed God. So he did it. Covers a lot of material. So he did it. Covers many years of obedience. And the question to you is, well, how many years of obedience are you willing to put in? He put in 120. I mean, we're talking about heroes of the Bible. We're talking about people who actually lived it day to day, and this is who we're talking about. We're talking about a guy given a staggering task that without complaining or rebelling against God, simply obeyed him day to day and took his measurements from God and did what he just did it. Sometimes that's enough. What I'm saying is that day-to-day, just getting it done was enough to make him a man of fame when it comes to the Hall of Faith in Hebrews. When you talk about famous people, I tell you what, you want to be famous in heaven? Just do it. Just live it day to day. Noah didn't shrink away from what God told him to do, even though it was difficult. And he is represented as a great hero of God, an example of a good and great preacher of righteousness, even though the whole world rejected him. And I'll close with a quote from a guy by the name of Poole. He said this, quote, "The work of the ark was laborious, costly, tedious, dangerous, and seemingly foolish and ridiculous, especially when all things continued in the same posture and safety for so many scores of years together, whereby Noah, without a doubt, was all that while the song of drunkards, the sport of the wits of that age. So it is not strange that this is mentioned as a historic act of faith." If we're in anything like the days of Noah, as believers in God, we need to live by faith. And that doesn't necessarily mean faith in some whirly, swirly, mystical sense. It just means day-to-day getting it done. Sometimes just staying faithful to God and faithful to the pursuit of getting your spouse and family into the ark is enough to make you a great man and woman of faith. No one said it would be easy. Noah spent his 120 years preaching the truth about ultimate salvation with no apparent converts. And he lived it faithfully as an example to us, and we should be encouraged and strengthened by his life, testimony, and story. Because it's just a story, just like our story. Just as real, just as daily, and just as factual. Hopefully we'll end somewhere in that scale of faithfulness occupied by Noah. Amen.